Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, make sure you check out the Potown store and get yourself a nice 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we are going to begin our Sword and Shield deck analysis. I'm going to kick things off with a Zacian variant, probably the most powerful Pokemon from the Sword and Shield set. We see potentially many different variants of Zacian coming into play, but this one, the archetype at least, the build with Lucario&Melmetal, was able to take down a Japanese tournament of around 2,000 players very recently, and Japan are actually playing the same format as us right now. They have basically the same card pool, their Ultra Prism, all the way up to Sword and Shield, so it really does give us a good indication that this is going to be a successful archetype for us, and I can definitely see why Zacian's a phenomenal card, and LucMetal has some great synergy. So, as always with these slideshow sort of videos, I'm going to go over the basic concept, show you the list, talk about some tech cards that we could be going through, also show you a matchup spread, and then some closing thoughts, and then we'll get out of here. So, let's start off with that basic concept. LucMetal GX is obviously a great partner here. His GX attack is just very strong naturally. Full Metal Wall can remove a bunch of energies from the opponent's active, so that's always great for us. It can slow down some early aggressive style archetypes, force them to reload their resources, and at the same time we gain an extra bit of bulk for the LucMetal itself, as well as the Zacian, which is fantastic. Having a -30 for all of your metal Pokemon for the rest of the game is going to be a real headache for the opponent. We make our Zacian effectively a 250 hit point 2 prize Pokemon, which is really annoying, especially because we also play Metal Frying Pans in this list, which bump it up to essentially a 280 hit point wall, which is very, very awkward. LucMetal also has the nice Psychic Resistance, so he effectively can be resisting 80 damage coming in from things like Mewtwo and Malamar players. So that's an extra bit of bulk in some Psychic matchups, which is awesome. Especially because LucMetal is way faster now in this format because we have Metal Sorcerer available. You can actually get into Steel Fist on turn 1, going second, and just start swinging and getting into your second attack a lot more easily. So LucMetal becomes more of an attacking threat, much faster with the Sorcerer, but also that GX attack is very, very strong at depleting your opponent's board early on, whilst also bulking up your guys for the rest of the game. And obviously Zacian's a V Pokemon, he doesn't have his own GX attack, so taking advantage of a LucMetal certainly makes a lot of sense here. Zacian V also is just such a good card in a vacuum. I've already said that. It's probably the best card, Pokemon card at least, in Sword and Shield. So getting that additional draw power and becoming the main frontman of a tanking style metal deck just makes complete sense. You're going to try and build around this in any way that you can. Like I said, there's going to be all sorts of other builds that I'll go over with Zacian, but this one just seems to have clear synergy. Let's move on to the Pokemon now, and we are going to start off with a 4 count of Zacian V. I honestly think he is that integral to get down on turn 1, and when you can't play supporters on turn 1, physical copies become way more premium. We have the 4 Zacian, we have 4 Quick Ball, and we have 3 Stellar Wish if you fail to start the Zacian, to try and Stellar Wish into Quick Ball, to try and get that guy down on turn 1, because if you're not using a supporter, getting to use that Intrepid Sword ability is phenomenal for you. Not only does it give you hand advantage, but potentially gets you extra energies into play. Once during your turn, you look at the top 3 cards of your deck, attach any number of Metal Energy cards you find there to this guy, and then put the others into your hand. If you do use this ability, your turn ends. So you use this sparingly, and you don't always have to use it. You know, when you're in the mid-game, of course, you're not going to. But this can be great if you've been reset stamped and don't quite have the answers to close the game. It can be great if you've just been like Marnied into a rough hand in the mid-game or whatever. But this is ideal when you're the player going first and you're able to top up your hand. If you're going second as well, oftentimes you may not be ready to use some of our other GX attack options that we have available. You might just be trying to power up a Brave Blade for future turns, so just using that Intrepid Sword for some extra hand advantage and potentially energy attachments is phenomenal. So that ability is just great. Brave Blade is his main attack here. For 3 metal, you do 230, and during your next turn, this Pokemon can't attack. That's part of the reason why you're seeing a mini Jirachi package going on in here. Not quite the full 4 copies, because we still have Zacian, who's a great card that you want to draw with all the time. But that Jirachi becomes an excellent pivot for us because Brave Blade can't be chained unless we switch in and out back into that Zacian. So it's pretty obvious that you want to have switching synergies here. And what loves switching synergies more than Jirachi? nothing, basically. So, yeah, 3 copies of Jirachi becomes a great starter for us as well. So 7 potential good leads in this list sounds very good to me. And being able to milk that value of Stellar Wish when we're moving in between our Brave Blades is always great. We can try and dig towards plenty of our draw options. We can try and get towards custom catcher combos. Now that we're back in a V meta, custom catcher now becomes pretty much the best gusting we have available. So that's obviously a big deal for us. It just cashes in on the fact that we have to switch out the active anyway for Brave Blade and makes it work in our favor. So this Jirachi is obviously a card that I'm a big fan of. We then have 3 tag team Pokemon. 2 of them are Lucario&Melmetal. Like I said, Full Metal Wall often is going to be the option that we go for. That reduction just becomes so frustrating for the opponent in the late game. Steel Fist is an option as well. 50, and you search your deck for a metal and attach it to this guy. That's usually live as well, so you can go into heavy impacts if you really need to on future turns. Like I said, thanks to his Psychic resistance, you can be reducing 80 by Psychic Pokemon. That can be really frustrating for Mewtwo players and for Malamar players and make this guy super, super tanky and awkward. So that's going to be a great option as well. He can be the main man in the deck for a decent time in those sorts of matchups. I am still playing 1 copy of ADP. Now, I know I will be profiling a more ADP-focused build, but think of this as a tech one-off in the deck just because Altered Creation is so good to like help win certain matchups. I think if you're already running Metal Energy, and I'm already running a mini tag call package, fitting in the Guzma&Hala, the Aurora Energy, and the ADP kind of is a no-brainer to me. It's going to make some controlling matchups way better, like Birds and Dolls, because you've just used an Altered Creation, and you can actually just win on custom catches alone sometimes. Non-GX decks in general, just going to be fantastic for you. So I think ADP really does patch up some of our more awkward matchups where Full Metal Wall would be useful, but not as useful as an Altered Creation, where we can really just win in a lower number of attacks. So I think the one of ADP still makes a lot of sense for me. Just turning him away seems really odd when he only really takes up like 1 or 2 spaces in the list, even though he's just a physical 1 count. Trying to flip-flop a Metal Energy for an Aurora Energy does have a small downside. You can't Intrepid Sword into that card, and it's less live for Metal Sources, of course. But having that GX attack option available is awesome, and Ultimate Ray, if ever the ADP sticks around long enough, is also obviously a great option for us as well, because he could power up more Zacians and whatnot later on. So having this tech one-of, we've seen how good the GX attack is. You shouldn't be that surprised that even the LucMetal deck can try and take advantage of this just to skew some matchups more in your favor that otherwise would seem pretty difficult. For other one-ofs, we play an Absol to try and slow down opposing Jirachi engines. And also we play 1 copy of Mew for bench barrier. I do believe Pikachu and Zekrom will be coming back into the format in a big way. So having Mew around is going to be important. It's also decent against like ADP Bird Trio if that's going to be a thing. Good against Mewtwo as well for sniping and stuff. We don't really have easy targets for sniping for the opponent with no Dedenne GX in the list at all. We're just relying on Intrepid Sword and Stellar Wish to be our consistency. But the Mew still comes in pretty handy. Sometimes even like using Psi Power to set things up like Pikarom for Brave Blade because 230 naturally isn't enough output, but also they have resistance to us. So either you can try and use Altered Creation in the Pikarom matchup to make Zacian hit enough, or you can try and use things like Mew to Psi Power things and put them in range. All stuff to bear in mind. Even things like Slap can put things... Oh no, Slaps can't put things in range, but Steel Fists can sometimes, so that's stuff to bear in mind. Those little prods are actually really important against Pikarom if you're not going to use the Altered Creation. We also have Ape Wisdom, the Oranguru from Sword and Shield, that has the ability, once during a turn, you may switch a card from your hand with the top card of your deck. This naturally has great synergy with Intrepid Sword, because you can force Metal Energies to the top 3, whilst also getting effectively an extra draw for that turn, because then you know that Intrepid Sword is getting you at least 1 Metal Energy in the top 3 to then start attaching to your Zacian, so it's good for acceleration. It can also help protect some key pieces, like I've already mentioned, custom catchers are key pieces, some key supporters like Mallow&Lana. These sorts of cards, you can try and recover them, well, protect them for when you use Professor's Research, and discard the rest of your hand. So you can just guarantee that some key cards just don't get binned off thanks to this Oranguru, whilst also having the upside of working with Intrepid Sword just fantastically. So he's a no-brainer one-off to have in the list for me. For trainers, we have 1 copy of Great Catcher, as well as 4 copies of Custom Catcher as our gusting effects. Customs, like I said, when we're moving towards a V and V Max sort of era, even though many decks will be mix and matching with GXs and V Pokemon, these Custom Catchers are just more flexible, and we are already playing a Jirachi engine, so I'm pretty happy to have customs in here. The Great Catcher, still obviously great for us for bringing up to Denes and such that can easily close out games. I am playing a Tag Call package with the 2 LucMetal, the 1 ADP, and you'll see the supporters in a second, but Tag Call seems to have a decent fit in here naturally, especially because we are tanking, we're reducing 60 damage coming into our guys, so obviously Mallow&Lana is a card that we'd want to have access to. Especially because that switching effect is also beneficial for the Zacian to be able to reuse Brave Blade. 4 copies of Switch as well, mainly for that Brave Blade synergy, also works with our Jirachis. And then we have 2 4-ofs of new cards. The Quick Ball is a 4-of in many, many decks, or will be at the very least. You can discard a card from your hand in order to play this, and then search your deck for a basic and put it straight to your hand. I shouldn't have covered that up with the number. But yeah, you just discard 1 card from hand, search your deck for a basic, which is every target in the deck, and just put it straight to your hand, which is great. It gives us some decent discard synergy for the next card that I'm going to be talking about, deck thinning in general, and giving us access to all of our Pokemon, so an excellent deal all around. The Metal Saucer also comes in clutch here. It's another 4-of that we have from the new set. You can attach a Metal Energy from your discard pile to one of your benched Metal Pokemon. So we have good acceleration from our own ability in Intrepid Sword. Not necessarily reliable acceleration, but it still can chip in here and there. But the Metal Saucer is really what's going to pull this deck into, you know, the higher tiers here, because not only do we have Intrepid Sword, do we have Ultimate Ray available. This item card that we max out here can give us additional attachments throughout the game and make sure that we can chain Intrepid Sword, chain Brave Blade as much as possible. So that's going to be really awesome. It powers us up. It means that we can be threatening, you know, if things really high roll, we could try and turn 1 attack people with Brave Blade going second. And, you know, on turn 2, even if we've gone first, it's pretty much live thanks to this card. So, yeah, overall, the Metal Saucer really does make this deck quite aggressive tempo-wise. For tools, we are playing 1 copy of a skateboard. I think I like the 4-1 split rather than a 3-2 split of Switch and board. Yes, there's the prizing headache that you can suffer, but I like moving out of things like LucMetal and Zacian on turn 1. Like, I value that quite a lot. So I feel like that's definitely a good option, because if we can access like a Quick Ball or something turn 1, get a Jirachi into the active, that guy can get knocked out, and it's going to be less influential than some of our bigger stuff getting hit when we are more tanking reliant. So that's something to bear in mind, but I still like the 1 of a skateboard. We do play Guzma&Hala in here as well, so it's relatively accessible. And we're also going to play those 3 metal frying pans. Taking away our fire weakness is obviously a big deal, with Welder Deck still being popular, most likely in the Sword and Shield meta, and that extra reduction is also going to be sweet. And then the only stadium we're going to play is Chaotic Swell. It's not really that we need any other stadium. There could be some that have minor benefits, things like Shrine of Punishment. Could also help out against things like the Pikarom matchup. You could even think about using Mount Coronet to recover metal energies for you if you really wanted to. But I think Swell fits pretty nicely here. We're disrupting Hearth, we're disrupting Thunder Mountain, and in general, we're only playing 2 copies of Stadium, but we're still competing in that Stadium war quite aggressively, especially with that Guzma&Hala. We can try and access that early on, put it into play, and make life awkward for the opponent. So I really do like that option to have 2 copies in here. For supporters, we do have that Tag Call package, as I've already mentioned. So 1 Cynthia&Caitlin just being a searchable option of drawing cards via those Tag Calls, which is great, and obviously can recycle some important cards. Mallow&Lana and Marnie being some great options to recycle. Guzma&Hala can access our tanking cards, our skateboard, our Swell to start being disruptive for opponents, and also that Aurora Energy if we are going down the ADP route specifically. So he's not like Mr. Versatile like he can be in other lists, but he is still a decent card to have in here, especially if we want to have the option to go the ADP route. And we do have 2 copies of Mallow&Lana for that healing spam that we can try and do. With our reduction, we oftentimes do tank hits, so Mallow&Lana comes in pretty handy here, especially when we're reducing damage. It's way better to heal when we have reduction of damage, because it forces so much more out of the opponent all over again, which is just great news. We have 2 copies of Marnie, which is an aggressive supporter for disruption here. You may notice that I wasn't playing any copies of Reset Stamp, and that's because Marnie is really filling that role for me to try and disrupt my opponent's hand size. Both players shuffle their hands without looking and put them to the bottom of the decks. We get to draw 5, our opponent gets to draw 4, so it's like a judge effect, but we get a slightly better payoff here because we're guaranteed to not draw back into those cards we put to the bottom of our deck, unless our deck is that low in size. And we access a fresh 5 cards, which is always good news for us. The main supporter that we are playing in a 4 copy of here is the new Professor's Research supporter that simply says discard your hand and then draw 7 cards. It can't be understated how strong this is, especially with Oranguru protecting key pieces like Mallow&Lana's, Marnie's, custom catchers. Those are the sorts of cards that I'd want to protect as I cycle through my deck, try and get more manual attachments, try and work towards some metal sources, and all that other good stuff. So still a very powerful supporter, and we have great synergy here with basic energy cards, as well as that Oranguru making life less awkward for us to be able to use this supporter to draw a lot of cards. For our energy, I've mentioned that Aurora Energy a couple of times. It's another new card from this set. When you attach this card from your hand to a Pokemon, you discard a card from hand. And while in play, it provides one of every type of energy, but only provides 1 energy at a time. So it's like a rainbow energy, but instead of taking 1 damage counter, you discard 1 from your hand. That gives us additional synergy with getting rid of metal energies, so that we can have Metal Saucer live more quickly. So we have the Professor's Research, we have the Aurora Energy one-of, and we also have our Quick Balls that can easily discard cards, as well as our Tag Team supporters. So we have plenty of means of getting these metal energies in the discard pile for us, which is obviously great news, so the Metal Saucer can be live ASAP. And this is really just the one-of in here to be a guaranteed energy attachment if you want to tag call for Guzma&Hala in any matchup, but at the same time, it is an attachment that works on ADP, so that you can use that GX attack, Altered Creation, in the matchups where he's important. Now, I am thinking of him as a tech card, so I'm not going for like 2/2 of both or whatever, because that does start eating into the physical metal counts, which you do want to have access to, because it's great to see them in your hand for Oranguru combos with Intrepid Sword. It's great to see them in your hand as well just for discard synergy, for the sources. You always want to have manual attachments for turn as well. So I still think keeping a relatively high basic metal energy count with 10 is definitely going to be a good deal. So yeah, let's look at the full list now. Pause if you want to take note of this and get it down for your proxy testing or whatever. But now we'll move on to tech options. Honestly, I went very vanilla with this list. I didn't go too wacky with any of my ideas, but there were certainly a few things that I was deliberating. The Japanese list that won the large event actually played 3 copies of Crushing Hammer in their build. They weren't playing the funky ADP stuff. Crushing Hammer really just adding more disruption to the list. You have LucMetal getting rid of energies. You have Crushing Hammers getting rid of energies. There's obvious synergy here with the amount of reduction that we have. We basically become a sort of tempo control deck, which is quite interesting. Reset Stamp may also be worth adding in here, even if it is just like a 1 copy to go alongside your Marnies. Energy Switch could also be a decent option here, because we could be using Intrepid Sword to attach to our Zacians, then we can move them off onto things like ADP or other options around the board. For supporters, especially when you do play a Cynthia&Caitlin, you could even think about adding in one-ofs of things like Clay or Bill's Analysis. Clay has great synergy with getting metal energies into the discard pile, and we're not too concerned about many of our one-offs hitting the bin in terms of Pokemon either. But that's the only reason why I'm not playing Clay, because I have, like a handful of one-off Pokemon that I would hate to get rid of. And Bill's Analysis is a card that I've loved in previous builds of ADP, and when we are a custom catcher meta, being able to like Sinlin back a Bill's Analysis for like a late game push can always be great, or having this as an option off of a Stellar Wish is always a dream come true when you're trying to close the game with custom catchers. So I can certainly see 1 copy of Bill sneaking into this list as well. For Pokemon options, obviously it's weird to see no Dedenne GX in a list, but we are more defensive and tanking based. That's the mentality I've had here. But a Dedenne is still, a fantastic out off of a quick ball in order to close games if you have been put down to a low hand size. Fiona is also a certainly interesting option to give yourself that whirlpool suction. I think it really does. It really depends on the amount of dolls we're seeing in the format. Morpeko seems to be an awkward archetype coming into the metagame, Florgus Dolls may still be a reasonable archetype. Instead of playing Fion, I've gone down the ADP routes to try and win that matchup, if that makes sense. So if you are up against any Clefairy Doll-based deck, you'll go for the ADP GX attack, and then you just need to try and use your custom captures effectively in order to bring things up from the bench in time to knock them out. So that's my strategy, but if you do want to add in a Fion, it obviously would help out against those Doll decks. And there's a handful of other sniping cards you could incorporate into the list. It's another thing that we saw from the Japanese 60. They actually incorporated this promo Duskmane Necrozma, which has that Dusk Shot attack. You do 60 to one of your opponent's GX or EXs, and he combined it with that Mimikyu, the Shadowbox Mimikyu that shuts down the abilities of damaged GX Pokemon. So you can see a synergy going on here. If Mewtwo is going to be a super popular archetype, maybe adding in more spreading cards, maybe again that stadium could be Shrine rather than Swell. Obviously Shrine starts digging into your own LucMetal, which is the only anti-synergy here. But it may be relevant enough against Pikarom to push yourself into range, or alternatively starting to disrupt Mewtwo with the Shadow Box as well. So that could be an additional combo that we have going on here if you really do feel like you need it. Onto the matchup overview. Now, it's still early days for my testing, so it's not like I've been able to play this archetype against all of the decks that I've got on screen here, so a lot of this is Theorymon. And it may look like I've just tried to say that all of the fire matchups are the bad matchups, but generally those are the case. Things like Abilitizard and Magcargo, especially with Torkoal, those sorts of archetypes can, if you're the player going first, they can go second, Welder, Attach, and just knock out 3-prize LucMetal in the active or a 2-prize Zacian in the active. They're going to start flying ahead, especially because you really don't have much of a response, especially against Abilitizard. If they're going to just GX on one or something like that, it could be very, very awkward for you. I also think things like Bird Blounds, or if Blounds is moving on to a Jirachi Lucky Egg build that we did see win the senior division of that very large Japanese event, they have such crazy damage cap. And yes, I know we do have our frying pans, so it's not like we're always weak to fire, but whenever they hit their gusts, they're going to be hitting stuff on the cheap, and it's going to make life a little bit easy for them. Same thing for the Baby Charizard deck. Usually Baby Zard has Ninetales to gust stuff, so that's going to be a little bit rough for you. A few other matchups that I think could also pose a bit of a threat. Stonejourner has a lot of healing, and more aggressive Zacian decks would probably be able to have a better time against Stonejourner than this one. We do reduce a good amount of damage that we get hit by, so Stonejourner is probably out of range of one-shotting our Zacians overall, but they can undo a good chunk of our damage a lot of the time. It depends how focused they are on things like Indeedee V and how many Mallow&Lanas they have access to, but overall I think that would be something that I'm a little bit afraid of. As to, am I afraid of Sableye Obstagoon? Specifically the Obstagoon, as we are an all-basic deck, and Obstruct is certainly an attack that I'm aware of and scared of to come up against. We only have our custom catches available. Sablegoons may be another matchup where you want to use that ADP, so you can just try and gust up a couple Sableyes or whatever to try and close game. But ideally, if you're the Sableye Goons player, you just stay all non-GX, just get your army of Zigzagoons out, and just try and promote some Obstagoons and just use Obstruct against this archetype and slowly do those chip damage strategy to get through the opponents. Obviously, we have things like LucaMetal that can try and strip away some energies from the Obstagoon. I believe Obstagoon only stops damage coming into this guy, but it might be all effects as well, so I might be talking nonsense right now. But with hammers and stuff, you might have a slightly better time against Sablegoons to make them miss an Obstruct here and there. And again, something like Fion could also help out a lot against the Obstruct strategy that Sablegoons may go for. Even without the Obstruct strategy, they can set up damage. Obviously, their ability damage gets through the reductions that we have, and Sableye can still hit like a truck if they're committing enough damage counters with their like Roxy combos, or even things like, what's it called? It's the Bursting Balloon, not Bursting Balloon, what's it called? Giant Bomb. Those sorts of cards can be really awkward, so Sablegoons can set up some math and still do some good work, so I would be a little bit concerned about that matchup overall. But then again, I've just kind of eyeballed this and looked at it on the surface. We don't know the full 60s of decks going into this format, so it's always hard to do a big matchup overview. The good news is that you can try and look at this slide and foresee, at least on the right here, where I've put all the new decks. These are all decks that I'm like certainly going to be recording, and I'm probably going to be recording more new decks from this format as well. So that's stuff to look forward to. On to my closing thoughts. Zacian V is clearly just a monster. He's a really powerful card. Gives you draw. We can make him very, very bulky as a 2-prizer, which is really a headache for a lot of people. So I think that's always something to look out for. I also think it's got a decent, like, quote-unquote mirror match against the ADP build of Zacian, which may end up being a more popular one overall, because ADP is a tried and trusted strategy. I've already incorporated ADP into this list because it can help out so many matchups that I'm expecting to be awkward. So Puritan ADP lists will be a little bit frustrated by the LucMetal, and that's something that's a good sort of boast to have in the format. Another thought I sort of have is that I am trying to be cheeky with the mix and match here. I've only got 10 basic metals sometimes. You could see that count going up to like 12 or even higher sometimes if you're really trying to commit to Intrepid Sword. And we have a couple of spaces committed to that ADP. And rather than having that mini package going on here, the sort of mix and match of GX attacks that we have available, you could try and go more towards traditional means that we've seen. Things like that Mimikyu Duskmane combo, things like having Shrine in here, or going down the Crushing Hammer route as well. I think those all could end up being useful. But overall, I like the option of having ADP's GX attack. I think it just beats a lot of matchups that otherwise are very awkward for you just on paper. And when you're going into a blind format, I feel like having options around a general field feels better than just targeting certain matchups. And ADP's GX attack certainly ends up coming very clutch in a whole heap of matchups that you may not even be considering. So that's something that I want to have incorporated in the list. I know it is the LucMetal build overall, but if you can't tell right now that I'm squeezing ADP into this list, I'm also a fan of the ADP Zacian list, but don't get it twisted. This is still going to be the more tanky defensive list, and there are going to be much more aggressive lists out there of Zacian as well, trying to push that 230 into the 270 range, or even if you're the Berserker build, even higher than that. So look forward to those builds of Zacian. Let me know what you think about this list in particular. Let me know your favorite cards from Sword and Shield. Were there any archetypes I was missing on the matchup breakdown that you want me to record? I'll be very happy to look into those archetypes in a bit more detail. So thanks so much for watching, guys, and I will see you in another video tomorrow for another brand new deck. Cheers.